Hi there, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and I'm going to hope that you can't hear too well my toddler running around behind me meowing at the cat. So stay tuned on that situation, but hopefully my noise canceling and whatnot fixes that problem. At any rate, I have yet another edition of the Freelancer Q&A series that I've been doing for, gosh, a few years now on this channel. Today, the question is, how do you set up your funnel and fill it with leads to avoid gaps between work? The context in which I was asked this question, I believe, made me a little bit hesitant or think that maybe there was too much of a focus on like the best practices for setting up a funnel, like should I use a CRM and how do I qualify prospects as leads or leads as prospects or whatever, all this type of stuff. And that's a little bit of a flag to me for a freelancer. And I'll kind of get into why I say that. And it's not that it's like, there's nothing inherently wrong with doing it. If you want to go do a deep dive into sales and prospecting and how all that works, it's not a bad thing for anyone in business to know about, but it seems a little cart before the horsey. And that's because most likely if you're a freelancer, especially in the early going, you're going to be taking on gigs in kind of sequential fashion, which means you're going to be taking on a few per year. So you only need like 2 or 3 wins a year in order to secure work. And so the way that you manage this funnel is a lot like the way you would manage employment. I mean, it's not much different. You're job hopping a little more quickly. Now, I will get into more detail as your business evolves and why you might want it to evolve and have more work and more diversified work. That's something I advocate for a lot. But for a freelancer asking this question right out of the gate, my concern is that you might be gearing up to do a little too much navel gazing in your CRM or something and not enough to just actually like go and establish a practice. So I'll get into why it is that I'm saying that, but I just kind of wanted to mention that from the beginning. And so the reason I say all this is how you're going to set up your funnel is really going to depend on how many pieces of business you need to win in a given period of time. So like, let's say that you only need to close like 2 or 3 deals a year. It's going to be overkill to install just about any kind of CRM, customer relationship management software, by the way. So like a HubSpot or a Pipedrive, or I think, there's another one whose name is escaping me, but basically like essentially a database for keeping track of prospects and customers. And that is absolutely a good practice for a lot of businesses to have, but it's probably overkill for a freelancer who could probably accomplish this with a spreadsheet or just your inbox in the beginning. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with establishing good practices early on. Just beware of going kind of overboard, setting up a tool you might not need. But let's talk through a little bit. Like I wrote a blog post some years back now that was like Sales 101 for freelancers, and I wrote one about marketing. But let's go through the sales process and some terminology. And if you Google like sales funnel or marketing funnel, it's easy to get extremely overwhelmed because just people in this line of work really like to. Anyway, there's a lot of different people have a lot of different opinions on what things should be called and how you move them between and among stages and all that. But the way I would think of, and let's forget about marketing versus sales or anything like that, but let's call it your like business acquisition pipeline, if you will. So out there in the world are people that could do business with you and you want to get them to do business with you. Let's talk a little bit about how some stages in that process might work. And the reason it's modeled after a funnel is that at each point, you're going to have some sequence in how you try to close business. And at each point in that sequence, presumably not 100% of people are going to convert. So not everyone that ever hears of you is going to do business with you. Not everyone that ever hears of you is even going to schedule a sales call. Furthermore, not everyone who has a sales call with you is going to become a customer. So at each stage, there is going to be some drop-off percentage, and this winds up looking sort of like a funnel. Let's talk through some basic terms here and how I would think about prospects if I were a freelancer. So at every buyer's journey, if you will, everybody who might do business with you, the most extreme end of the spectrum is they've never heard of you. Now, if somebody has never heard of you versus if they have heard of you, I'm trying to think of like exactly how many stages I want to define here for a freelancer. So there is this kind of concept from the user journey. They go from I've never heard of this person to I've heard of you and I don't care all that much. Gradually, they might get to know you over the course of time. Maybe it's that you're doing some content marketing or you're in a forum or a Slack together. So there's this kind of building of trust. And that can happen synchronously or asynchronously, by the way. Like if you host a podcast, you might get listeners that you've never talked to, but they come to trust you. Likewise, it can happen through direct interaction. So that kind of runs the gamut. But over time, somebody goes from I've never heard of you to I've heard of you, I'm getting to know you, I'm starting to trust you. And then they, assuming that they would be a good fit, they start to think about the potential of doing business with you. This is sometimes called consideration. And at that point, they're kind of, you might be having sales calls or sales activities with them. They might be reaching out and emailing you with questions. They might want to set up a call, and so on and so forth. Now, there's a lot of different terminology for prospects that are moving through this. So you might hear, for instance, somebody talk about a qualified lead. And what a qualified lead versus, say, a lead is. A lead is just anybody that there's a possibility that you might do business with. A qualified lead is one that would be a good fit for your business, meaning they have the right amount of budget, they philosophically agree with you, etc. So you can also have an unqualified lead. Like this might commonly come up if somebody goes to your website and they want to do business with you and you have some, rate that you're charging or some minimum engagement. And they're like, oh, well, I was hoping to have you do that for me for $200. This would be not a qualified lead. They don't have enough money to pay you. So there is this idea of moving from like a lead to a prospect to an opportunity. I don't know that I want to bury you in all of these things. Here's how I would actually think about this, as we talk about these terms. And I don't want to make this video about me creating like a marketing and sales glossary per se, but think of it this way. You will probably have some kind of sequence of events, or at least you should, that happen when you're doing sales. Here's hit subscribes, for instance. So with sales, when somebody gets into our like sales process, they reach out. Typically, sometimes it'll be business referrals. Sometimes it's somebody we know that has moved on to a new company. Sometimes it's somebody doing form fills through our website. In theory, it could be cold outreach. We don't really do that. But somebody reaches out. Somebody wants to have some kind of conversation with us. Once that is exchanged, typically digitally, they're filling out a form or emailing us. The next step is to set up a discovery call. So we're not like pitching anything at this point. We're just listening to what they're trying to do, asking questions like, why are you reaching out to us? What have you tried so far? What are your goals, KPIs, that kind of thing. So there is this initial kind of back and forth to schedule a discovery call. And then there is the discovery call itself. From there, we regroup and we either write a proposal or we explain why we're not going to write a proposal because it wouldn't be a fit or something like that. And then we set up another call to go through the proposal. And then assuming that we come to some kind of agreement on the proposal in that call or shortly thereafter, we send it over for signature and then we do onboarding. So if you think about this process, there's an initial asynchronous exchange, then a discovery call, then a proposal call, and then any proposal negotiation or back and forth, and then business. Here's how I would think of your funnel. It's just for us anyway. It's each one is a stage in that sequence. And so not everybody that ever sends us an email is going to set up a discovery call. Not everybody that gets on a discovery call is going to want a proposal. Sometimes they just go dark right after the discovery call. Not everybody that we do a proposal for responds to that or wants anything. So you can drop off at every stage in the process. Now, is somebody a qualified lead at some point in this process? It's going to kind of vary. I mean, you can get situations where, it seems by all accounts like it's the right kind of business and they seem to want the right kinds of things. But then we do some discovery and this is the purpose of discovery, say, oh, actually this is not a fit. Like you're looking for this, you're looking for paid advertising and we don't do that or whatever. So, these terms like qualified lead and so on and so forth, they can be complex. I mean, like I could certainly go through all of them, but they're going to have different relationships with your process. Now, thinking through the process of a freelancer, and the reason I'm kind of talking about hit subscribe sequence and thinking about what's a qualified lead or when does something become an opportunity or whatever, I wouldn't worry about that stuff too much. That's where, when you're asking a question like, how do I set up my funnel? That's what I'm starting to worry about. And I can tell you from experience, I did this wrong. I set up all kinds of complexity in the early going when it wasn't necessary. And I read up like excessively on, what is an opportunity? What is a qualified lead? Can a qualified lead be I wouldn't overthink those things. I would set up your sequence that you think would make the most sense for your prospects to go through. And then I would just create like Kanban with those stages. So you have, initial communication stage, a discovery stage, a proposal creation stage, a proposal call stage, proposal negotiation stage, customer stage. And once you set those things up, you've defined your funnel. And from there, as it becomes relevant, you can start to read about the finer points of setting up a sales funnel and how to tweak this and whatnot. But I would just script out this series of events without worrying too much about all the terminology around it. Now, getting back to what I was about to start saying for a freelancer, I would absolutely follow something like Hit Subscribe's discovery process. And the ticket size there makes sense, so we're typically with Hit Subscribe, we're doing 5 to 6 figure engagements with clients. So that's what a typical freelancer is probably going to do, especially like, custom app dev over a long period of time. And when you're having 5 to 6 figure engagements, that is one or more phone calls. Typically, I have kind of a series of rules of thumb. Like if you're doing 4-figure engagements or less, that can be a credit card swipe. You get up into the 4 figures, that's probably a call. 5 figures, at least one call. 6 figures, at least a call. Larger 6 figures starts to be probably an on-site discussion during that proposal process. You get into 7 figures and probably multiple on-sites, travel, that kind of thing. It's a long sales cycle. So for the freelancer, we're probably talking about calls. I would guess 1 for discovery and 1 for proposal is what I would recommend. So now back to what we're talking about here. How do you set up this funnel? Create a Kanban board. You can just use Trello or something. And then you want to keep track of each stage. And you also crucially want to keep track of the total number of prospects that move and where they die out. So what you want to do to work backwards to know how much lead generation you have to do is to say, okay, 50% of all of the prospects that listen to a proposal from me go on to become customers. So if I want 3 customers this year, I'm going to need to have 6 proposal calls. I also know that when I do discovery, 50% of the discovery calls wind up in proposal calls. So now working backwards, I need 12 discovery calls if I want to have 3 wins this year. And then if you work even further backwards, how many people that reach out to you or that you get into contact with wind up booking discovery calls? Maybe that's only like 10%. So you need to get like 120 possible leads this year in order to move that all the way along to victory. Probably won't be that low if you're a freelancer. Probably won't be just 10% of people that get into your orbit book discovery calls. Maybe if you're doing something like a lot of coldish prospecting, but usually your network as a freelancer is going to be, your lead generation is going to be largely your network and people that you know. And typically there's going to be a better, rate than 10%. So with all that in mind, you want this kind of mathematical outlook working all the way back to the earliest stage of potentially doing business with you. Let's just call these leads if you're aware of them. So you can start to reason about how many leads you will need, how many sort of vague conversations and networking and listening tours and stuff that you would need to do in order to secure the number of wins that your business needs in a year. Now, going back to the freelance condition here, if you will, for most freelancers, the rate at which people become interested in your work, it's largely going to be like referrals, maybe it's Upwork or something, but the rate at which people come into your pipeline isn't going to need to be all of that high for you to get a few pieces of business a year, which is what a newbie freelancer is probably going to need. So a lot of this setup and infrastructure and hand wringing over how to get enough business into your pipeline is probably going to be a little over considered for you in the beginning. Now, if you start to run dry in your network, as can happen after a few years, then you may need to start thinking more in these terms. But if you just hang out your shingle as a newbie freelancer, I mean, first thing you could do is just turn your last employer into your first client. Then you can probably also turn 2 or 3 other old employers into clients. So like that alone right there might like fill your dance card for the first year. You can also get the word out to your friends and family, and that might carry you through year 2. I mean, it really does kind of go that way. At the very beginning, you're going to get a lot of people that are excited on your behalf for hanging out your shingle. They want you to succeed. They're going to make referrals to you. So that early going, combined with the kind of relatively small amount of freelance leads you're going to need, or freelance engagements you're going to need, makes it pretty easy to fill your dance card out of the gate, probably, if you have a standing career of doing good work and being liked by your colleagues. Now, here's the thing that should start to happen to your practice over the course of time if you're serious about building an equity business and building stability. The situation that I've just described, where you take on 2 or 3 gigs a year and they're like 40 hours a week and they happen in sequence, that looks an awful lot like employment. And ironically, employment's not a very stable relationship. All of your income comes from one source, and that source can snap their fingers and just decide they're done with you, and then that's it. You need to go find something else entirely to do to, occupy 100% of your risk profile again. So what's going to happen as you start to do business is, just by kind of existing in this world, you're going to start to want to maybe have 2 clients that you're juggling at a time instead of just one, or you're going to start to want to do shorter engagements and have more of them. Or you might start to take on larger projects and manage subcontractors. Whatever you're going to do, you're probably going to start looking at, how can I have more than just 2 or 3 pieces of business in a year? Because to be stable, the rule of thumb I would offer you is, you don't want any one client accounting for more than 20% of your revenue. If they're accounting for more than 20% of your revenue in a year, that is called a whale client, and that's dangerous. Now, like, you could think of salaried employment as a specific instance of a whale client, where you have one client that accounts for 100% of your revenue. So you want to gradually be moving away from that situation and moving into having more clients that account for smaller percentages of your revenue. Now, if you're astute and you're thinking about what I've said about funnel math and how many leads you need, well, if you need, instead of 3 pieces of business closed in a year, you start to need 5, 10, 20, 40. Now you're going to need a much bigger funnel with many more prospects in it and much more stuff going on. This will happen to you gradually over the course of time. So what I would suggest that you do is set up, I'm not telling you not to set up a CRM out of the gate, by the way. So, maybe you set it up in a spreadsheet, or maybe you start out with something basic. I think Pipedrive is, I've never used it, but I understand it to be kind of a good entry-level tool. Set up that tool, get to understand its basics. Don't get into all the theory and just have this elaborate funnel and go off and read about lots of sales stuff. Set up what I'm talking about, which is like initial contact, discovery, proposal creation, proposal presentation, negotiation, onboarding, let's say. You set up those stages, and you see how those work for you over the course of time. Now, you might find something like, hey, I actually have better luck just doing a single call where I do the discovery and then, propose something on the fly. Hey, so be it. Condense your Kanban board, make it all easier. So experiment with what works in your sales process. Keep track of it, keep notes on it. It's brutal to do, but record yourself doing sales calls, because you will learn a lot from it. So get to understand your process, experiment with what works, what doesn't, what could be improved. And that's going to inform what this funnel looks like. Now, in order to do some refinement here, especially if you start to run dry on business, you'll need to think of tactics for putting more leads into the top of your funnel. Because remember, it's going to be math at every stage. You're going to be calculating, working backwards. I need this number of pieces of business in a year, which means I need this 1 step back, which means I need this 2 steps back, etc. So as you're building out your business and you're starting to target having more and more wins each year to diversify your business, you're going to start to need to make a plan at that point for how to expand your funnel, how to get more business in there. Is that prospecting on social media? Is that doing cold outreach? Is that hitting the podcast tour? Is that writing a blog? There are different tactics. Those tactics would go a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm doing here. So, kind of circling back to offer some concluding thoughts, how do you set up your funnel and fill it with leads to avoid gaps between work? Honestly, the biggest answer to this question for a freelancer is you get better at executing more smaller gigs. The gaps between work come from when you're treating doing your freelance practice as serial gig work, because then you're dedicating all of your time, 40 hours a week. I mean, unless you're really burning the midnight oil, you're dedicating all of your time to a client. So when that contract ends, now you're done and you need to go quickly find your next gig. It's really hard to keep your dance card full when it's like that. It's easier if you were taking on work that could be done in parallel, or work that was shorter in duration. So, if you were doing like week-long engagements and you needed 20 of those a year to be successful, that would be another good model. And then the answer to the question, how to fill your funnel with gaps between work, is going to evolve as you evolve your practice from a kind of dollars for hours, time and material sort of thing, to getting more reps and delivering something more repeatable and having more of an equity business, or, just bringing in contractors and building a time and materials agency. But the way that you fill your backlog with work is going to evolve as you evolve your practice. So I hope that's helpful. It's not exactly a direct answer to the question, but I hope it provides the right perspective here, because I think that there maybe is some parallel in getting too wrapped up in best practices and learning way too much about like the finer points of sales, especially because sales looks so much different depending on the nature of your business, depending on your ticket price, who you're selling to, whether you're B2B or B2C, et cetera. So you can go off on a real tangent reading about like a sales funnel for a business that looks nothing like yours. So I wouldn't overthink it. I would set up a Kanban board, and that's really all you're going to need in the early going. And then once you have that set up and you're improving on it, then you can start to think, okay, how do I get more things into the top of this funnel? How do I refine and improve my win rate through the funnel, and so on and so forth. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's helpful, and I will catch all of you next time.